Welcome back, everybody, to Let's Talk Toku. I'm your host, Squall Charlson, and I'm joined today by my awesome friend, Steven.
Hello, I'm Steven, aka SteveSekai. You can check me out on YouTube and Twitter. Otherwise, I help produce the show. That's about it.
Help make sure it runs. Everything works. Yeah. So today we have an awesome topic in our ever-expanding repertoire of tokusatsu fun. And today I thought it'd be a good idea to do a TV show throwdown. So outside of the movies, outside of everything else, we look at the top 3 big names in tokusatsu television and sort of pit them against one another to see which one's better, which one stronger, weaker, maybe. Would you say Kamen Rider is the weakest? Yeah, I would.
No. It's the best one.
So we have Ultraman versus Kamen Rider versus Super Sentai, and I think that we should start off chronological. I think.
Yeah.
Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about? Like, what are some of the pros? What are some of the cons that you feel?
I think we both can agree that Ultraman easily has the best effects and some of the best fights in Toku. The explosions are great. The miniatures still continue to be mind-bafflingly good and accurate. And it really adds this sense of weight to these giant monsters and aliens throwing each other around in cities that, like, even when they superimpose, like, the actors looking up at them, it feels like, yeah, they could be there.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. Great effects, great
Practical
fights.
Beats CGI.
That is
every
true.
time.
Yeah.
Like, the CGI in Sentai and Kamen Rider is
The CGI in Ultraman,
laughable.
like new Ultraman, it's phenomenal.
yeah.
It's so good.
And when you pair that with, like, the miniature sets, it makes the whole show look on a whole nother level.
Cohesive.
Exactly.
On the other side of the coin, where, you know, this is really good effects, I was watching Ultraman Orb. I was trying to get through Orb. I've tried it like a couple times. And the thing that always stops me is, yeah, the fights look good and they're fun, you know, and especially like the modern age, you know, they're, you know, for somebody who, you know, would have trouble like getting into this, it's engaging enough to sort of, you know, captivate any audience to sort of watch it. Kind of like the Marvel movies are like a spectacle.
It's Michael Bay-esque.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting to. Like, the con of this show is because the effects are great, the fights are fun and in your face, it really just equates down to a lot of, like, set explosions, a lot of buildings blowing up, and, like, literally, like, you're watching an episode and, like, 3, 4, 5 buildings explode in it, and it's just, like, Ultraman is just, like, building explosion porn. Like, that's literally all that it, like, really kind of equates itself to, in my mind. And that's the hardest part that I have getting into this, is that how many people are in that building?
Suspension of disbelief versus spectacle.
It's not enough of a spectacle, I feel sometimes, to pull myself out of that. Like, Kamen Rider and Sentai always have things like where they, you know, protect the buildings, they get people out of the buildings. The buildings still blow up, but it's usually just one, and it's usually the same footage
every time.
The one where it's like,
like it's always like one building, or it doesn't actually blow up all the way. Like, it'll start to tip over or something.
Yeah,
and they show people getting out every time. Because
I feel like that's important. Is that Ultraman, while he is a hero and a symbol for justice, doesn't really help the people very much.
He's more of a mitigating the damage done.
Yeah.
Versus, like, preventing damage, period. Because it's hard to prevent damage when you're that big. So,
and I guess, like, it does kind of fall into the kaiju sort of mindset that like everything is expendable and that it's super imperative that you get in there and you stop it. But I'm like, I don't want to see that. I want to enjoy a hero doing things without real, like, trying to, like, wrap my mind around the scope of the loss of life here with literally each misstep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that, it just stresses me out. I would say another pro for Ultraman is, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the continuity of everything kind of goes almost from season to season, where Kamen Rider are very specifically, until the movies, in their own separate universes. Very separate. Sentai is kind of like separate, but they're neighbors, but they're not really. It's only until those Versus movies come out. Ultraman very much is like, this is a hero. This is the hero story of becoming a hero to join the likes of the other heroes. And here he is with all the other heroes before we introduce the new hero. And as simple as that is, it works, and I really like that. I like being able to watch a season, and then you can watch another one, and the influence of that first season, makes your enjoyment of the next one greater.
Yeah. But I think that's also, as we've talked about before, a little bit of a con is that they end up relying way too much on legacy monsters and heroes.
Yeah.
You end up hearing about like, oh, it's, Leopardon, and wait, that's Spider-Man. Whatever.
It's Gomez.
It's Gomez. Yeah. You'll hear the monster name and you're like, okay. If you haven't seen it before, or like the first one I tried to watch, I was like, they're just aliens, I guess. Mm-hmm. And people are just fine with that. But I guess that is a like canonical thing, is that aliens are just on Earth now from, I guess, a while back.
I must have missed that season.
Yeah, right. And so now I try and watch a season and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that just aliens are here and everybody's cool with that. Like, okay.
Yeah.
It's always a shocker.
Yeah, I would definitely chalk that up like as a con, that it is very much sort of like almost like nostalgia. Like Ultraman relies too heavily sometimes on these past monsters, whereas Kamen Rider, Sentai, they give us new monsters of the week. They give us something kind of a new spectacle, something, I don't know, like it's a very, from like a design standpoint, really innovative to see how they take this ice cream cone and make it a villain.
Yeah, right.
Instead of just like, here's this monster suit we've used like 4 times.
Exactly.
But now they introduce new problems, which I guess is fun and cool, and it's probably a little bit cheaper and nicer, which is why they have better effects and graphics.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I like the new monsters. I like the new threats, the new everything. It just kind of,
especially like with the core designs of like villain groups instead of just like the Spark Dolls of Ultraman that are just, oh, it's that same monster for the 15th time.
Look out.
I'd say another pro, speaking to that kind of legacy thing, though, is the suit designs are very classic. They're, they've kept that very clean, simple, sleek
minimalist
design. Exactly. Yeah. Which really helps them in the fighting and with the effects.
Yeah, I read like suit actors, like they much more prefer like doing something like that versus like, I don't know, like Decade of Russell armor.
The Kamen Rider suits are really cool designs, but some of them are so impractical.
Do you know about Decades? So like Decade has like all these different helmets. They have like an action helmet. They have like a close-up helmet, and depending on which helmet they have, so like the explosion helmet, like he sees like this and he can only see down, is what I remember. The action helmet, when they're doing fights, is like little, like I feel like they're like maybe this big so that they can see. And then like the close-up, because you can't see in there, they're like the tips of my fingers. Jeez. Are the little eye points for those.
And like,
it's crazy.
Like Kiva uses real chains. It's so heavy. Like, so when you get these Ultraman suits that are just like basically spandex and nothing else, you can have such more wild fights, especially with their very wrestling inspired style of like, grab a monster and do a suplex. Looks so much cooler because they can move that way. Whereas maybe Sentai, but especially Kamen Rider can like not pull that stuff off.
No, they try. But I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I'm going to give you a con for your suit design. So, yes, the suit designs are slick. They've mastered what they want it to look like. The problem, however, is that they all look alike. If you were a parent and your child really liked Ultraman, and you've maybe seen like 2 episodes, and you try to go to the store to find the toy of their favorite Ultraman, good luck. Like stripe number 2 and 8 are slightly more purple.
Then
I don't know. Like I have the hardest time trying to distinguish between them. I can tell the first one, but then some of the ones after the first one kind of look the same.
Red and blue. Flip a coin as to which color it's going to be, and then
I feel like with Ultraman, because they look so alike, like it's impossible to tell them apart. Like if you were robbed by an Ultraman and they brought in like all these Ultraman like in a police lineup, and you're like, number 4,
right?
I guess number 4.
He has the same yellow eyes and like red on it.
He stole my purse and then he flashed me the Ultra Beam. He got out.
Oh my god. Yeah, I feel like the only Ultraman true design that I've really, really enjoyed is X, because it's very different. It's got the whole chest plate, and like that's the only one I've been like, I'd buy a toy of that Ultraman.
Sure.
Not counting Gridman. Gridman's great.
Is Gridman Ultraman?
It's an Ultra series. It's a spinoff.
Oh, I think this is like one of my cons with the show is I have no idea how to get into Ultraman. Like I've seen Ultraman, but when it comes to Sentai, I had an instant in because I watched Power Rangers. I was at a young age and I was like, I love Power Rangers. I think it was Jungle Fury, like when it had just come out. Like I watched all of Operation Overdrive. And so I went on YouTube to find like episode 2, and I ended up finding a video comparing the Japanese one and the American one. And I was like, what is this? And I found it and I loved it. I watched all of Geki Ranger. I got into Sentai basically because of Power Ranger. It helped port me over to that fandom. With Kamen Rider, it was a little bit trickier because Kamen Rider, they had a team up with Decade, and so I watched Decade's season, and it was still on air, and I enjoyed it, but I had no idea what was going on. I was like reading Wikipedia, and I was just like, oh, this makes no sense to me. But then I watched Kiva, the one that came out before Decade, and I loved Kiva. I loved the characters. I loved kind of what they were doing with it, and that helped bridge that into my love for Kamen Rider. And so when Kamen Rider Double would come out, I watched that week after week, and the rest is history. But with Ultraman, I feel like I missed the boat on that just because I didn't grow up. Like they have dubs. They brought dubs to America of Ultraman. Yeah. So I feel like that was a huge thing. Like I know like my parents remember Ultraman. Your dad remembers Ultraman. Oh, yeah. Like it's just kind of a generational thing. Like when people talk about like Doctor Who, if they're an older fan of Doctor Who, their favorite doctor is always going to be Doctor Number 4, Tom Baker, because that was the one that was on air over here. Exactly. And that was like the one that was like, so I feel like with Ultraman, it's hard for me to step into it because there's just so much, and it feels daunting to an extent. And I see all these people on Twitter that are enjoying it and loving it and talking about it, and I'm like, I wish I could be part of that. So when I think of Kamen Rider, and it feels weird to say this, but I feel like there's a more mature theming. Not necessarily like they're in adult situations or this. I just feel like they treat their characters and the story points more realistically. Like it's kind of like it's more of like a character study at a certain point for some of them. There's a lot of maturity there. There's a lot of growth that you don't necessarily see, I feel, in Ultraman or Sentai. Yeah. Not that they don't have that. I'm not saying that those two shows do not have that. I'm just saying that Kamen Rider per pound does more of this almost like per arc or per episode. Like you have a lot of like characters that kind of like have like redemption arcs, and like it's something that is very few and far in between for the other two. Exactly. Like Sentai has to develop 5 to 6 characters, like usually at the minimum. Whereas Kamen Rider can focus on 2, 3 usually, and like the villain side, and that's it. So that you really get that sense of growth per character, a bit more mature themes, which we'll get into eventually when I turn on my writer media studies brain and just be like, oh, it's but as we kind of talked about earlier with like the opposite of Ultraman, like Kamen Rider's suit designs, while sometimes can be too much, there's so much more well crafted and individual. There's a certain design element that I feel makes each one of them individualistic. Very like stand out way more than a Sentai or an Ultraman. Yeah. Because they're just only focusing on typically 1, 2, maybe 3 or Kamen Riders. I'll admit when I first saw all the 01 designs, I was like, eh. But then they really quickly grew on me because each set, like each kind of faction of 01 has a very clear different design from one another because they're all using different technology. Yeah, seriously, the higher craftsmanship in the suits is very noticeable, and it's kind of I almost feel like it's a detriment sometimes at the point where it's so unique and it's so different, and it's kind of a throwaway at this point. If I'm going to put this as a con, I know we probably haven't talked about this. Like with Kamen Rider Double, he's two hemispheres of the body, and the colors change and the powers change. And like the first like 6 episodes, they're just trying to show you all of those forms, and then sometimes they never go back to those forms. So like there's a lot of craftsmanship that is seen for 1 episode. Whereas Ultraman, like it's always the same suit. And Sentai's always the same suit. Yeah, and I just kind of I appreciate that a little bit more. Like you get more used to it. Like I see stuff on Twitter, I see things like for sale, and it's like the punching hedgehog ice form from Kamen Rider build, and I'm like, I don't remember that. If you look at like the main proponent, like the main thing that they sell are the belts. Yeah. They have like 1 belt for like all these people, and they don't have individual belt, yet they have different individual suits. And I just feel like that's something
my biggest issue with Geo is like even the future riders are just, it's the same belt as Zeo, but they just slap something on the front of it. Like
that I feel like that's kind of like the lazier part. I do like the idea that different people with these belts can unlock different things, and I feel like Kamen Rider Kabuto did that really well, that they all use the same belt, but then they all have the different sectors that transform them into, and they can share them and swap them, and I was like, that's really cool. I really like that. But having the whole belt be the whole thing, and especially like in like 01, where like he has his and then they have theirs, it's like, where did they and I like at least what 01 is doing with theirs, where like every faction has their own belt, their own design. When it comes to Kamen Rider, there's not a lot of continuity between each of the seasons. They're all in their parallel universes, and the structure of how the episodes are laid out, for the most part, it's 2 episode chunks the whole way through. And what's good about that is you free yourself up from 22 minutes to tell a story to 44.
Which is like most television shows.
Most television, yeah. And, you're going to find like you go on Netflix or anything, like they're hour long. Game of Thrones is 44 minutes long. Yeah. Sometimes it's longer than that, when it's special. But it's because you sometimes need that development. You need that time that a sitcom length of like 22 minutes, half an hour doesn't fully give you that. Whereas with Sentai, it works because a lot of Sentai is one character, they devote the whole episode to this one character or this one incident or this one objective that they try to fix by the end of it. And with Sentai, if you do that any longer, it's annoying. Yeah. But then Kamen Rider has these really good 2 episode arcs that allows you to develop more than just the one thing. But when it comes to like having to fill episode time and to fill chunks before you get to your next big arc, I feel like Kamen Rider is really weak. Blatant. Yeah. It's super weak, like, because instead of just trying to throw away 1 episode, they have to throw away 2. Exactly. Or they tack something on to the end of the second episode that shouldn't even be there. Like, I don't know. That is just a big problem that I have with Kamen Rider. And 01, thankfully, is fixing that.
Yeah, it's getting a lot better with it.
It's going by the individual episodes plus the overarching arc. Yeah. And it's working.
I think, obviously, I'm putting up an act for entertainment. I do love Kamen Rider, but, like, we agreed on a lot of these cons beforehand to talk about. And the 2 episode structure, it worked really good when they introduced it with Double, because as we talked about before, it's a very clear noir style build up, twist at the end of the first episode, resolution in the second episode. And like that's just a really classic Japanese and mystery story kind of style of storytelling.
And it's kind of like they gave you enough evidence to even figure it out before you get to the next episode. And that was fun. But then when it's just 2 episodes, and with Kamen Rider, the arcs, like the mini arcs that they do, like the 2 episode ones, the bad overshadow the good oftentimes. For sure. Like when I think of a series, like I think of Build, I can think of like the overarching elements that happen in the show, but I like focus in on like those 2 or 4 episodes, that were like, and that's kind of for every season of Kamen Rider, is like I look at like those critical episodes I remember more than the other ones. Like Double's final episode, I'm always never going to forget that, like how it disrupts everything by being a 1 episode thing where they try to do 2 episodes worth of stuff.
That second to last episode is so good. Perfect. But I can't remember most of it outside of that one scene that I don't want to spoil because it's so emotional. I don't think I cried, but I definitely teared up.
They wrap up everyone's characters really well.
Yeah, and then that last episode, I remember almost all of because it just throws it all away, and it's so awful because they need to bring him back for movies.
I feel like we can talk about this more with Sentai, but with Sentai, you get these one episode things, and so when you're done with the episode, it's like, here's what's on next week, and it's easier to jump into. But I remember this happening when I first watched Samurai Sentai Shinkenger, that there was an episode where Takaru, the Red Ranger, they're all samurai that live in like the same house. He leaves because he totally messed up that episode. And he leaves, and it said this episode will continue into the next one. And I was just like it wasn't a foreign concept to me that there is 2-part episodes, but I was just like, I was so hooked, and I was so like, oh my God, this is so different than the one episodes here, here, and here. What is going to happen in this second episode? And I watched like the next time on, and I was just like, oh, and I was so much more excited than it when I'm just expecting it every time for Kamen Rider.
Yeah. For the most part, a lot of the seasons kind of throw away their, not theming, but theme gimmicks, I think we'll say.
Can you explain that better?
Yeah. So, X-Aid.
Sure.
I haven't seen a lot of, but from what I've seen, it's not my favorite, I'll admit.
I had to watch it all.
I'm so sorry.
In a marathon. I streamed it. It was...
Yeah, no. But, like, the theme is doctors and gamers because of virus. And it feels like that was the extent of what they thought of it. And then they just gave up after that. They were like, oh, yeah, virus is the same thing between the two of them. And then they just didn't care.
So basically what you're saying is the show will have, Kamen Rider itself will have a theme where they are doctors.
Yeah.
And they're also rising up. They're gamers.
Yeah.
But then literally their gashats, the thing that they transform with their gimmick, is video game inspired, and that is the extent of video games in the whole series. The doctor element is like after a few episodes of them helping people, it's there, but it's almost like as if they don't want to like focus on it or worry about it, and like the whole extent of the doctorism of the gimmick is that they're just hanging out in the break room.
Yeah.
Like they're hanging out in the hospital break room.
Wearing lab coats and that's it.
Yeah.
And have a stethoscope on.
And I feel like there's very few series in Kamen Rider, the franchise, that have had a gimmick, which is a very Heisei thing.
Yeah.
To have it, and I feel like Double, after Double, everything had to kind of follow a gimmick.
Yeah.
Like Double had that very like exact, and even Double didn't do it very well too.
Nah.
But like the whole theme of this show, like it was like previously on, and it shows you like all these like the cork board of like all the
trying to solve the crime.
You know, even little things like that still keep you engaged in what the theme, the gimmick is. But I feel like other ones, you know, just kind of were like, Forze did really well with that. Like Forze, I think, is like one of the strongest ones, but it was simple. It's just high school in space.
Yeah, and like I think 01 is doing an excellent job with it. They've really stuck with that whole Humagear ethics of Humagear thing, and I know you're not caught up, so I'm not gonna say what's.
And this is gonna be outdated by the time it goes up.
That's also true, but.
Okay, let's move on. We got one more, right? One more con for Kamen Rider.
So
Kamen Rider.
Like I said before, I do admit there are problems with anything, but Kamen Rider, especially later Heisei, really just give up on their themes, like not theming, but theme gimmicks almost. Like the whole X-Aid, it's doctors and gamers because of the word virus, and then after that they just throw it away. It's just like, yeah, they're wearing lab coats and they have a stethoscope on, but that's the extent of doctorism you get.
So what you're trying to say is like Kamen Rider has these themes that the whole show is based around, and then kind of doesn't rely on them, and doesn't it like sort of like forgets them. It's like this is like they push it way to the side. Like I know with X-Aid, they're doctors and they're also rising up. They're gamers, and the game aspect outside of the gashat and outside of like influencing their suits, is a backseat. Like it's immediately like after the first 10 episodes, like not even a thing at all. Like Emu, the main character, he's like this major, like huge, the best video game player ever, and he's literally just playing Mario. You know, like it's not a thing anymore. And like same with the doctors, like sure they're helping people, but it's not like that's not the driving force of the show anymore.
Yeah.
It's just the strife between them. And like the most doctor thing about the show is that they're wearing like white lab coats and they're hanging out in the hospital break room.
Like that's it.
That's really it.
Forza does it well. Double kind of started it.
Mm-hmm.
It's hit or miss at times, like as you've said before.
Yeah.
Like the whole corkboard thing between episodes with the string going from pictures to kind of piece together the mystery is great. But in terms of him being a detective, aside from the occasional joke about him being half-boiled, like that whole part of it is pretty much inconsequential aside from the fact that he is solving the mystery and that's it.
Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of like just something that's kind of a mixed bag, you know, with Kamen Rider.
Yeah.
01's doing a really well job at that, at like keeping kind of like the CEO organization, this task force to stop these rogue human gear. And then of course you have like Metsuburajai.net or whatever the hell it's called. So that's pretty much all that we have for Kamen Rider. Like it's like I feel Kamen Rider is the strongest of the three, just because a lot of those theme points, and because I feel like Ultraman was the hero of like the parents and the grandparents, and Kamen Rider has really transitioned itself into becoming that iconic hero for today.
Yeah.
And I feel like it has a lot of values that Ultraman still does, but with the shifting everything, Kamen Rider really kind of comes out on top.
Yeah.
So
I'd agree.
We've gone over Ultraman. We just finished up Kamen Rider, and now
The best one.
we saved the best for last.
No.
You're damn right.
You're the one who called Kamen Rider the strongest one.
Yeah, but I didn't say it's the best, though. Super Sentai is the best, and I'm not biased.
Not at all. Can you tell which series each of us liked and not liked?
Ultraman obviously is like a symbol of Japan. It's obviously like this grandfathered in hero that everybody knows. You can say Ultraman and every Japanese citizens could go, oh yeah, oh. But with Kamen Rider, you know, you got a little bit of mix. Depending on their age range too, they might think that you're like a little child. They might think that there's something wrong with you if you're talking about Kamen Rider as an adult. Super Sentai, I feel, has a step above Kamen Rider too, because it's kid,
more recognizable because of Power Rangers.
Yeah, it's still considered by some, you know, childlike and kiddish,
sure.
But you know, there's a lot of good stuff to Sentai, and that's why I personally like Sentai a little bit more. I like the team dynamic. Personally, I feel like I am a Kamen Rider. I do everything on my own. I probably, you know, like could do whatever on my own, and that's why I think Sentai appeals to me more, because I have sometimes trouble in like group dynamics. And I like watching people get along where I maybe can't. I wish I had like the funny, goofy one in my group. I wish, you know, like there's so many different tropes. There's so many different things.
Yeah, you wish you had a team around you.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
That friendship there's a lot to it.
And I don't know, it's always been more fascinating to me about what is this group dynamic and how do these people get along and work together. And I think that's pretty much like my first pro with this show, is this dynamic with the team. That this team has issues, obviously, but they also have a lot of breakthrough. They have a lot of moments where they are able to come together and work something out. And to me, I feel more like that's a success than just a Kamen Rider figuring out how to kick differently or dance differently, if we're talking about Kamen Rider Double, to defeat this monster. Like, I'm like, okay, cool. But when I see like a team that has the ability inside of them and can't defeat this monster, and then they all do a 180, or they all come back at the problem differently and they can work something out, that to me is more fundamentally awe-inspiring. And Sentai gives that to me, I feel, more often, like per capita, than Kamen Rider does. Like, Kamen Rider is a good show, don't get me wrong. I love watching the dynamic, I love watching the drama. Yeah. But there's just something childlike about Sentai that just appeases me more.
Personal growth as opposed to like physical growth. I'm going out on a limb here that says that Sentai has better character growth than Kamen Rider. Sentai start to end almost are completely different people, except for Gokaiger. They're the exact same people.
But Kamen Rider, oftentimes, they get past an event that changes them. They don't necessarily change themselves. Mm-hmm. There's an event that happens to them that forces that change, which happens in Sentai too, but they change to overcome that problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah. If I may, I'm going to come back at you with, though, the fact that because there's so many of them in a season, this is kind of getting into our first con, that you'll have, like, focus episodes for kind of each ranger, and that means that the full story only tends to pick one, and usually the red.
That's fun.
And that,
well, yeah.
It's, to me, it ends up becoming like a major drag.
But this is exactly what Kamen Rider does too. You have your main hero, your Red Ranger effectively, and then it's pocketed around all these other people that have character traits or have different motivation things that's going to help guide the story like a Sentai does, but they're completely different. And because they're so different, they have to always resort to like the awkward, like, oh, it's you again. Oh, it's you. Yeah. You know, until they can get to like we're at this point now where Sentai's just kind of like, okay, what do we need to do to get to this point? Let's do it.
For Kamen Rider, you get more of a sense of they're the hero because they have to become one.
Sure.
They are overcoming the circumstances of the situation, whereas with Sentai, it's often like almost a messiah complex with the Red Ranger. Like, I mean,
unless you're talking about Go Busters, where the
except Go Busters, yeah,
Messiah is the villain.
Yeah, but like
it's a real complex.
Exactly. Like Gokai Red is literally crucified at one point, or like he's on a cross.
That's a common theme, though. I mean, we're gonna have a whole topic about crucifixion in Sentai or in tokusatsu in some way. That's photoshopped.
Really?
That never happened in the show. It's from the first season of Kamen Rider, and they have him there, and then they blow him up.
Yes, the Red Ranger always just becomes like a savior. Like it's just up to him doing it by himself. Good for him, because he's the chosen one.
I'm okay with a Red Ranger that goes out of their way to make sure that their team's okay, because that's the reason they're the leader.
Yeah.
Or at least the central hero.
I guess I just don't like the chosen one aspect that a lot of them have, as opposed to like with Kamen Rider, when they are the chosen one or like the destined one with Geo, it is so terrible. But then you have like Build, where your main rider is not the chosen one. It's the secondary rider who ends up being like the one. And so that's feels so refreshing to have that storyline, but have it not be the main character.
And Sentai does give that to us. I know, like, we're not really hitting a bunch of these points because I feel like I have to defend Sentai at this point from you and from like a lot of people that probably have the same mindset. Another really good thing that we can talk about, kind of with Kamen Rider, where it's based on the 2-episode arcs, Sentai is really easy to jump into because they have those individual episodes, because they have those focus episodes. I think instead of focusing on everybody, you give us that one episode, because there's so many times I've watched a Super Sentai where I don't necessarily enjoy or love everybody on the team. Like, I'll have one favorite, I maybe like them. One episode that focuses on the Green Ranger, boom, I totally get the character. I love him, I'm in it, and then every episode following that I love. But like when it's like a 2-episode arc and like they have to like balance all this other stuff, a lot of that very like subjective like change or development or growth or like push that character goes through in that little time frame is sometimes too subtle in Kamen Rider, that you watch it but you don't fully understand the scope that they go through, and Sentai kind of gives you that because it hits you over the head, because it's meant for a younger audience of like what they're going through. Like Gokaiger has this amazing episode where the Pink Ranger, she's kind of the wallflower of the team, and I was like, I love everybody on this team. If I had to kick one off, it'd probably be her, because she hasn't really done anything. They have an episode. She's like this princess. She's like one of the last surviving people from her planet. She's a princess that watched her parents die, and she is confronted with the man the monster that killed them.
Whoa.
And she goes 180. She's immediately like fighting. She's attacking. She's going nuts because she is just like so passionate and desperate and angry. And it's just like that one episode, like she decides to leave all of them. She like breaks down and cries. She has a moment with everybody. And it's just one of the most, I don't know, like dynamic episodes that focuses on a character, and it just completely changed my mind. And I don't think I've ever had something like that in Kamen Rider. I feel like I progressively like them more, and I don't realize that I really like them until the end, or I progressively dislike them more. Sentai, it's like one episode and I'm sold, or I'm done with this guy.
The structures almost feel like Sentai is meant to be watched week to week, and Kamen Rider almost feels like it's meant to be binged. Maybe that's why I like Kamen Rider so much more, is because coming in so late, I've just been binging through seasons, and so Sentai ends up feeling tiring because it's like a whiplash of content, whereas Kamen Rider is like very clear sets of...
I get that, yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like,
I feel like, because I've watched Sentai live since Go Onger.
Mm-hmm.
Watching it, I don't feel like the newer ones I kind of feel a little bit, distant from, because I do have to have those binges because I don't watch it sometimes every week.
Yeah.
But like going back and watching some of the seasons before that, I did not enjoy them as much. And people, universally love them, like Deca Ranger, Maji Ranger. Everybody really likes those. But I feel like I watched them at such a close proximity to one another that I ended up not enjoying it.
Yeah.
And so I feel like you're onto something there, where like Kamen Rider is very much this ongoing, like Kamen Rider is a very Netflix structured sort of thing. When it comes to Netflix, I was never super sold or on board with the original content, and I remember watching the first season of Stranger Things, and I watched one a night, and I hated it.
Yeah.
I absolutely could not understand the fascination behind it, because there is so much that doesn't happen that relies on the bookends of the episode. And I feel like I love Build.
Yeah.
Very much has that same sort of strategy, where it's got a really strong opening, really strong ending. You could forget what happens in the middle for the most part. And I honestly watched that in like a week to catch up when it was on air. I don't remember much that happens in it.
Yeah.
But with Sentai, even when I do binge it, I can like think back to those individual episodes, and I can be like, oh yeah, that's the episode that Blue and Green got, glued together and they had to work together to fight. And like that strengthened like the weakest relationship out of the five of them. And I was like, oh yeah, I may not remember every single beat, but you're like, I know exactly what the purpose of that episode was.
I instantly recognized.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Like Kamen Rider, it feels like the important parts are the important 20 minutes of every set is the 5 at the beginning, the 10 between the two episodes, and the 5 at the end. And like the middle is just kind of little pieces of information and like a few fights, but the crux of the story is within those 20 minutes as opposed to 20 minutes of the whole episode.
Right. I feel like we were talking about something. You were talking about the sort of structure of the villains in Sentai versus Kamen Rider. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I would love to. So this is more of my, writing brain, analytic brain.
Big brain hours. Stand by.
So the reason I like Kamen Rider so much more, from an analytic, like media studies standpoint, is with its villains are always focused on, the idea of human fallibility. The villains come from us, are humans in some instances.
Domestically, almost.
Yes, they're all very domestic. They're all, like, X8, it's, just some people. 01 is people and robots that people made. O's is the mere thought of greed that humans have, etc. And I mean, Double is just a mafia selling drugs.
That is true.
Yeah. So you have that very domestic, our problems come from ourselves and we need to battle that. Whereas Sentai and Ultraman, it pushes that xenophobic kind of idea that Japan has, which is an issue that they have, of all of the problems come from outside of us. It always is an alien force coming in, or an ancient evil that has nothing to do with, the people around them. And the heroes are pretty much never tied to the evil force at all. It's just adjacent to. And we're meant to always fight them, whatever it is.
Well, you could almost turn that on its head and say that Kamen Rider doesn't think that outside forces are as big of a problem because Japan, in their eyes, is like the high seed and the superiority, like be all end all of things. Like when you look at Build, for instance, this huge event with the Skywall happens where it splits the country, and it literally never talks about the ramifications elsewhere in the entire world. And I feel like that's kind of something that Kamen Rider does.
They sort of do. In some instances. They do mention, like, other nations are on our butts trying to get to the Pandora's box, and we have to solve it now before they try and come in. And the little bit that I've seen of the Grease movie is about, like, an American coming and being like...
Yeah, but that's the V-Cinema movie. That's not the actual, like, portion of the show. But,
I mean, I don't know, budget constraints, whatever.
Yeah,
but,
I get what you mean. Yeah. So, like, Sentai and Ultraman are very, like, outside forces. Kamen Rider is very much like, this is our own problem that we are dealing with now.
The Kamen Rider, always comes from or is tied to that evil force. Double uses the same drug allegories, the memories, to transform. O's is using the core metals of the greed. Builds... Pseudo spoiler? I don't know. I'm just gonna avoid that. Build does too. With the exception of maybe Forze, which is the most Sentai-like. Like, that's the most separated that they kind of get. And even then, they're still pretty adjacent. Yeah. Whereas Sentai is like, these powers have nothing to do with the villains. They are just powers and villains, and they're fighting.
Not always, but yeah. For the most part.
Yeah. I mean, there's always exceptions, but like... That's why I love Kamen Rider's theming so much more, is because it's very personal and very, like, you need, especially for that older audience, you need to start recognizing that some of your problems come from things that are within your control, and you need to start focusing on that.
But I feel like that almost becomes a crutch that Kamen Rider does, where it's like, this bad thing, here's the good power you can use from it, whereas, like, with Sentai or Ultraman, it's kind of like, you're defenseless without this. You have no way of controlling or combating what's happening to you. And then you get the ability if you're able enough to take it. And that's why I personally, like, Ultraman, like, you get to team up with an alien to kick ass. Like, that's on paper, that's the coolest idea. Kamen Rider is just like, there's a mafia that's selling drugs out there. You're going to use these drugs, but you're going to use this little filter so that you don't get the negative effects, and also are going to fight with that. Like, I like both of them, but I feel like you're not giving enough strength to... I guess. I get what you mean.
Yeah, it's personal taste. It's,
This has gone on way too long.
It was way too long.
Steve, thanks so much for coming on.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah. So, that's all we have for you guys today. We will be back with a new episode. Ooh. So, stay tuned. All right, guys. See ya.